The engines of the Pioneer roared as the spacecraft surged into the void, piercing the atmosphere of Earth. Commander Alina Voss stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the view in front of her, a vast expanse of black, speckled with distant stars. This was the culmination of decades of research, millions of dollars, and countless sacrifices. She couldn't afford to let her nerves show. Not now, not when the whole world, no, the whole universe was watching. "Commander, we're approaching the threshold," the ship's AI, called Astra, reported in her calm, synthetic voice. Voss took a deep breath. The threshold, a mythical point beyond which no ship had ever returned. It was not just a location, it was a question, an enigma. Scientists and philosophers alike had theorized that crossing it would either shatter humanity's understanding of space and time or open a gateway to untold possibilities. Her fingers danced over the controls, making final adjustments. On the screen in front of her, a swirling blue vortex appeared, an interstellar rift in the fabric of space-time, its edges pulsing like the heartbeat of the universe itself. Pioneer was designed specifically to handle the unknown forces it would encounter here. A state-of-the-art propulsion system, capable of generating quantum singularities, would allow them to tear through the rift at faster-than-light speeds. "All systems are green," said Dr. Leela Wells, the ship's chief engineer, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. "Once we cross, we won't be able to return the same way. The rift will bend time and space. No one has ever made it back to tell the tale." "I know," Voss replied, her voice firm. "That's why we're going to make history." There was a collective silence as they passed the final threshold, the moment of no return. The Pioneer shuddered, the air thick with tension as the ship's AI initiated the quantum drive sequence. The crew braced themselves for the unknown. The familiar hum of the engines vibrated through the hull, sending ripples of unease through their bodies. Then, without warning, the Pioneer was torn from its path. A violent lurch sent the crew sprawling in their seats. The stars outside seemed to twist and stretch, bending in impossible shapes. Gravity fluctuated wildly, throwing objects around the cockpit, but the crew managed to hold onto their seats. The hull groaned, and for a terrifying moment, it felt as though the ship was being pulled apart. "What the hell was that?" Dr. Wells gasped, gripping the console. "We've crossed the rift, but something's wrong. We're off course." "Astra?" Voss called, her heart pounding. "Report." "Warning. Unexpected anomaly detected. Space-time dynamics are unstable. Initiating recalibration." A blinking red alert flashed across the view screen as Astra's calculations shifted. A new shape appeared before them, a massive, glowing structure floating in the dark. Its proportions were incomprehensible, as if it existed in more than 3 dimensions. It was like a cosmic gate, an energy bridge suspended in the very fabric of space, radiating a faint pulse of golden light. "This wasn't in the simulations," muttered Lieutenant Theo Carter, the mission's pilot. His knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. "There's no data on anything like this." Voss's pulse quickened as she realized the magnitude of their discovery. What they had found was not just the rift they had aimed for, it was something far beyond that. "We need to go through it," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "You're sure about this?" Carter asked, hesitation in his voice. "Commander, if we enter that thing—" "I'm sure," she cut him off. "We didn't come this far to stop now. This could be the key to everything we've ever dreamed of." With no further time to debate, Voss gave the order to proceed. Carter hesitated for only a moment before steering the ship towards the glowing anomaly. The ship lurched once again as they made contact with the energy field, and a wave of disorienting light enveloped them. For a brief instant, everything went black. There was a sensation of being stretched beyond the limits of time and space. The crew felt as if their very atoms were being unraveled and reassembled. Then, just as suddenly, everything snapped back into place. The Pioneer emerged from the rift, but not into the cosmos they had known. The stars were gone. Instead, the vast emptiness was replaced by a shimmering, unnatural grid, stretching infinitely in all directions. The laws of physics they had relied on for so long were no longer relevant here. Time itself seemed to fracture. "Where are we?" Dr. Wells whispered, her voice thick with awe and fear. Commander Voss took one last look at the grid, then turned to the crew. "I don't know yet, but we're about to find out." The Pioneer had crossed the last threshold, and humanity was now on the edge of eternity. The eerie stillness of the new realm was suffocating. Outside the ship's hull, the shimmering grid stretched endlessly in all directions, a lattice of energy woven across the void like a cosmic web. It wasn't like anything the crew had ever seen. The stars were absent, and the usual twinkling specks of distant galaxies had vanished. In their place was something far more unsettling, an intricate, glowing network of lines, seemingly alive, pulsing with an unknown energy. This isn't space as we know it," said Lieutenant Carter, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. His fingers hovered over the controls, but there was no visible point of reference to navigate. It felt as if the very concept of direction had dissolved. "We're floating in something beyond our comprehension," Dr. Wells murmured from her station. The normally confident engineer sounded rattled, her eyes glued to the readings. "I can't even get a clear reading on our surroundings. Nothing makes sense. We've left behind everything we understand." Commander Voss's gaze remained fixed on the view in front of her, the pulsing grid. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on her, but she refused to show fear. Humanity had come this far by pushing the limits, not retreating from the unfamiliar. There was no turning back now. "Astra, can you make sense of this?" Voss asked, her voice unwavering. "Unknown spatial dimensions detected. Current location outside known universe. Initiating analysis. Data inconclusive." The A's calm response only added to the growing sense of unease. If even Astra, with all its processing power, couldn't make sense of their new surroundings, what did that mean for the crew? "Could it be that we're outside of time?" Dr. Wells suggested, her fingers nervously tapping the console. "Maybe this place exists in a different temporal dimension, where the rules of physics, time, gravity, light, don't apply the same way." "Possibly," Voss replied, though doubt gnawed at the back of her mind. She had always prided herself on her ability to maintain focus, but now, surrounded by the incomprehensible, she couldn't help but wonder if they had crossed into a realm where humanity simply didn't belong. Suddenly, the ship shuddered, and a strange energy wave rippled through the Pioneer. The lights flickered, then stabilized. The grid outside seemed to ripple, as if it were reacting to their presence, alive, aware. And then, without warning, a voice echoed in the ship's speakers, low, ethereal, and impossibly ancient. "Welcome, children of Earth. You have come far, but you are not yet worthy." The crew froze, staring at each other in disbelief. The voice wasn't from any radio transmission or communication signal. It was as if the voice had come from everywhere, and yet nowhere, an omnipresent whisper that vibrated through the very air inside the ship. Who are you?" Voss demanded, her voice firm but laced with awe. "What is this place?" There was a pause, a strange hum reverberating through the ship's walls. The voice returned, this time more directly. "We are the Keepers. We have observed your species for millennia, watching as you crawled from the ashes of your world. You are but children, and yet you seek to transcend." A chill ran down the crew's spines. The words held weight, an ancient judgment that hung over them. We didn't come here to be judged," Voss said, her voice steadying as she fought to maintain control of the situation. "We came for discovery, to break the boundaries of our understanding." "And yet you do not understand what you are asking for," the voice replied. "What you call discovery is but the first step into a realm far beyond your comprehension." You cannot wield the forces that govern this place without consequence." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, tension crackling in the air. What had they gotten themselves into? Commander Voss's thoughts raced. There was no question now. This wasn't just a journey to a distant star system. It was something much more dangerous, far more profound. They had crossed into a space between worlds, a place where the very concept of human achievement was irrelevant. Whatever lay ahead, it would test humanity in ways they could never have anticipated. "What do you want from us?" Voss demanded, her voice unwavering. "We're here to prove that humanity can break through its limits. We're not here to fail." "You are here to be tested," the voice replied, its tone both ominous and patient. "You will face the trials of the threshold. Only by surviving them will you prove your worth to ascend." The words sent a wave of dread through the crew. What trials? What kind of test could they possibly face here, in a place that didn't follow the rules they understood? Suddenly, the ship lurched again, and the grid outside began to glow brighter, faster. The structure around them pulsed with an almost sentient energy. "Brace yourselves," Voss ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "It looks like the test is about to begin." As the ship plunged deeper into the unknown, a sense of inevitability settled over the crew. They weren't just crossing a threshold of space. They were standing at the edge of humanity's future, whether they were ready for it or not. The Pioneer trembled as a sudden, intense gravitational force pulled them deeper into the heart of the grid. The hum of the ship's engines intensified, fighting to stabilize in the face of the unknown energy surrounding them. Every system on the ship flickered erratically, and the crew could feel the air inside the hull shift, becoming thick with tension. "What in the name of?" Lieutenant Carter began, but his words were cut off by a sudden jolt that sent him tumbling from his seat. "Everyone, stay strapped in," Commander Voss barked, her voice sharp, her eyes darting to the various consoles around the bridge. The ship was no longer responding as it should. The controls had become sluggish, the once smooth interface of Astra now glitching with fragmented data. They were at the mercy of whatever this place was. A pulse of energy shot through the ship, causing the lights to flicker and the viewports to fill with a sickly greenish glow. Time seemed to stretch and distort. Seconds stretched into minutes and then snapped back. The very fabric of reality felt as though it were bending under the pressure of this unknown force. "Commander, I'm seeing things," Dr. Wells said, her voice shaky. She was staring at her console, her hand pressed to her forehead. "The numbers, the data, it's changing. I can't make sense of any of it. It's like we're not just in another place, but another time." Voss turned sharply. "What do you mean, another time?" "It's like we're seeing the past and future all at once. There's no consistency, just flashes, memories, distant events, even ones that haven't happened yet," Dr. Wells explained, her voice quivering. "I swear, I just saw Earth as if it were a dream, but it's not possible. It's like I'm seeing parallel timelines." Before Voss could respond, Carter spoke up. His eyes were wide, his hands gripping the controls with a force that threatened to crack the console. "Commander, the ship's systems are failing. Astra is losing its ability to calculate. We're drifting through, I don't know what." Voss's pulse quickened. The Pioneer wasn't just stuck in an alien dimension, it was starting to lose its anchor in time itself. Their descent into this unknown realm had unleashed a chain reaction, affecting every part of the ship. And then, as if on cue, the voice, the same ethereal presence they'd heard earlier, spoke again, louder this time, reverberating through the ship's corridors. "You seek to transcend, but know this, all progress comes at a cost. The price of your journey will be more than you understand." The crew exchanged nervous glances. The words hung in the air like a weight. What did that mean? Was it a warning? A threat? "Hold on," Voss muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. "We knew the risks when we started this mission. We'll find a way to make it work." But as the words left her mouth, A new sense of unease crept over her. This wasn't just a test of humanity's ability to survive in space. It was something far darker, a trial of their very souls. Without warning, the ship's main console flashed a warning. Dr. Wells gasped. "Look," she said, pointing at the screen. "These readings, they're picking up something. A force, a pattern maybe, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not energy, it's consciousness. The entire grid, it's alive, some kind of sentient force, and it's aware of us." A cold shiver ran down Voss's spine. It was as if they weren't just intruding into another part of the universe. They were entering the mind of something ancient and unfathomable, something far beyond the scope of human understanding. "Is it attacking us?" Carter asked, his eyes flicking between the rapidly fluctuating systems. "No," Voss replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. "Not yet, but it's like we're being tested. Whatever this is, it's watching us. It wants to see what we're made of." Suddenly, there was a sharp, piercing sound, a screech that echoed through the Pioneer, reverberating through every wall. The crew winced, their hands covering their ears, but the sound didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder, more insistent. "What's happening?" Dr. Wells cried out. "What is that noise?" "Astra, what's causing this?" Voss demanded, her voice sharp. The AI remained silent for a moment before responding, its voice cold and clinical. "Warning. The frequency of the energy pulses is destabilizing your neural patterns. Your perception of reality is being affected. The entity you are encountering is attempting to communicate with you directly. Prepare yourselves." Voss exchanged a glance with her crew. "It's trying to speak to us," she said, more to herself than anyone else. This wasn't just some cosmic anomaly or an unknown energy field. It was something trying to make contact. The sound grew louder, and suddenly, the walls of the Pioneer seemed to shimmer. A strange, pulsing light overtook the ship, and for a brief instant, the entire crew was immersed in a swirling storm of images, feelings, and voices. Voss blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what she saw. Her mind was assaulted by memories, some hers, some not, but all intensely vivid. She saw her own childhood, but distorted as if from a distant future. She heard the whispers of her parents, calling her name, but they were not speaking to her. She saw the Earth in flames, a planet at war, and then the voice again, louder, more commanding. "To ascend, you must first break." The vision shattered as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Voss breathless, disoriented, and shaken. The crew was in a similar state, wide-eyed, gasping for breath, as though they had all been pulled through a dream that had stretched across lifetimes. "We've been marked," Voss said, her voice trembling. "We've crossed into something far more dangerous than we realized." But before she could say more, the voice spoke once again, its tone final and foreboding. "This is your trial. The cost of progress has already begun." As the words echoed in her mind, Voss realized the truth. There was no turning back. They had entered a place where the very essence of humanity would be tested, and they would not leave unchanged. The Pioneer shuddered again, and the ship's gravity systems flickered, throwing the crew off balance. The lights dimmed, and the eerie pulse of the grid outside seemed to intensify. For a moment, the crew remained still, shaken by the psychic onslaught they had just experienced. The weight of the voice's warning lingered in their minds, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. They had crossed into a place far beyond their understanding, and it was clear now that whatever awaited them would not be kind. "Commander," Dr. Wells said, her voice barely a whisper, "what are we supposed to do?" That wasn't just a vision. It felt like we were being judged. Voss gripped the edge of her seat, her mind racing. The voice had made it clear that they were being tested, but for what purpose? And why had they been chosen for this trial? "We stick to the plan," Voss said, her voice steady despite the growing fear gnawing at her insides. "We keep moving forward. We've come too far to back down now." Carter, still gripping the controls, looked at the view screen with unease. But we don't even know where we're going. This place isn't like anything we've ever seen. It doesn't make sense. Voss stood and moved to the front of the bridge, where the swirling grid pulsed with a rhythm that almost felt alive. We don't need to understand it all. We just need to survive it. The crew exchanged looks, uncertain but resigned. There was no turning back. They had crossed the threshold, and now they had to face whatever lay ahead. Without warning, the ship lurched forward, pulling them into motion as though the grid itself had decided to move them. Outside, the lattice of energy stretched and shifted, its glowing strands folding in on themselves like the pages of an ancient book. The viewport seemed to warp and twist, revealing strange, impossible landscapes. Cities built of shimmering light, oceans made of liquid crystal, mountains that defied gravity, floating in the sky like islands. It was all too much to comprehend. The crew could only stare in awe and terror. "Where are we?" Dr. Wells breathed, her hand pressed to the glass. "This isn't possible. These things, they shouldn't exist." "I don't know," Voss replied, her eyes narrowed as she studied the shifting images outside. "But we need to move fast. Whatever this place is, it's not safe. We're being watched." Just then, a new presence made itself known. A shadow appeared at the edge of the view screen, a massive figure that seemed to emerge from the shifting grid. It was unlike any creature the crew had ever seen. Its shape was fluid, constantly shifting, as though it existed in multiple dimensions at once. But it was clearly sentient, its gaze fixed on the ship, as though appraising the Pioneer and its crew. "Commander," Carter's voice was barely audible, tinged with both fear and awe. "I don't think this is a creature. It's something else, something more." The figure didn't move, but a voice filled the bridge, not through the speakers, but directly into their minds. The same voice they had heard before, but now more direct, more personal. "You have come far, children of Earth, but you are still bound by the limits of your own minds. You seek to transcend, to break the walls that confine you. But the true question is, can you survive what lies beyond them?" The words were a challenge, not a question. And as the figure's presence grew more intense, the crew could feel their minds being probed, their thoughts and memories sifting through the unseen force surrounding them. "What do you want from us?" Voss demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "We're not here to conquer you, to steal from you. We're here to understand. To learn." The figure's form flickered, its edges becoming sharper for a brief moment. "Understanding is a luxury. You cannot afford it. Not yet. Only by surviving the trial will you prove that you are worthy of what you seek. Only then will you be granted the knowledge you desire." The light outside the ship flared, and the grid shifted violently. The crew staggered, gripping their seats as the ship was pulled forward once again, faster this time. It felt as though they were being drawn into the heart of something ancient and vast. "The first trial begins," the voice intoned. "Prepare yourselves." Before Voss could react, the ship's exterior lights flickered, and the air inside the bridge became charged with static. A sudden pressure gripped her chest as though the very atmosphere was being altered, warped by an unseen force. She struggled to breathe, but it wasn't just the lack of oxygen. It was the overwhelming sensation of being on the edge of something that threatened to break her mind apart. "Astra, what's happening?" she gasped, her vision blurring as the pressure intensified. "Unknown phenomenon detected. Force field interference. Reality destabilizing." Just as quickly as the sensation had begun, it vanished. The ship stabilized, but the crew was left disoriented, their senses overloaded. The viewports were now filled with swirling, distorted images, flickering shadows of creatures that seemed to move within the grid, never fully solid, never fully real. The feeling of being watched intensified, but this time, it wasn't just external. It was as if something within them was being tested as well. Dr. Wells gripped her head. It's in my mind. It's probing us. It's seeing our darkest fears." Voss looked at her crew, their faces pale and filled with dread. The trial had begun, and it was unlike anything they could have prepared for. They were no longer just explorers of space. They were pawns in a game far older and more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. "We hold our ground," Voss said firmly, her voice cutting through the fear that had taken root in the crew. "We didn't come this far to fail. We'll face whatever this is head-on, together." But deep down, Voss couldn't shake the growing feeling that this was only the beginning, and the true cost of progress would soon become painfully clear. The Pioneer trembled once more, the ship's hull vibrating under the strain of the unknown forces pulling at it. The grid outside pulsed in rhythm, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to reverberate through the very core of the ship. The crew sat tense, their minds still reeling from the onslaught of strange visions and the ominous voice that had warned them of the trial they were now in. "What do we do now?" Lieutenant Carter asked, his voice low and anxious. He was gripping the console with white knuckles, his eyes darting nervously between the glowing readouts. "We wait," Commander Voss replied, her gaze fixed on the viewscreen. Despite her outward composure, she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had led her crew into the unknown, but now she wasn't so sure they could survive what lay ahead. "We wait for the trial to begin." The air on the bridge seemed to grow heavier, thick with anticipation. Every sound, the hum of the ship's engines, the clicking of equipment, the faint rush of air, seemed amplified, as though the very space around them was holding its breath. Then, without warning, the ship was plunged into total darkness. A moment of complete silence. Voss's breath caught in her throat. Something had changed. The ship's systems flickered to life again, but the readouts were erratic. Their connection to the outside world had become strained, and the familiar hum of the ship's systems now felt alien. The ship was no longer merely drifting, it was locked in place, suspended in some strange void. "Commander," Dr. Wells's voice crackled through the darkness, her tone shaky. "This isn't just a malfunction. Something's wrong. I'm detecting fluctuations in the spatial field. Reality, it's warping." Voss didn't need to ask what that meant. They were no longer merely navigating a strange dimension. They were at its mercy. Suddenly the voice returned, the same ethereal presence that had haunted them since they crossed the threshold. This time, it was louder, more urgent. "The first trial begins now. Face your fears, children of Earth, and show us your worth. Only by overcoming your deepest terror will you prove you are ready for what lies beyond." The words echoed in the minds of every crew member, sharp and insistent. A chill ran down Voss's spine. They had been warned, but hearing the voice now, so close and so direct, left no doubt that this was real, this was happening. Without warning, the space around them began to twist. The walls of the ship seemed to ripple and distort, as if the very fabric of reality were unraveling. The crew gasped as the bridge warped into an entirely different environment, one that looked nothing like the high-tech interior they had known for years. It was a dark, desolate landscape, an endless stretch of barren earth beneath a blood-red sky. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, their peaks shrouded in smoke. The horizon was a blur of twisted shapes, and the air was thick with the scent of burning debris. A familiar scene, one that haunted Voss's nightmares. She had seen this place before, on Earth. "Is this Earth?" Carter murmured, staring at the barren land. "It looks like a future version of Earth, a war-ravaged world." Voss clenched her fists. She recognized this place all too well. It was a world where humanity had failed, where war and destruction had torn everything apart. It was a future that, deep down, she feared might come to pass if humanity didn't change its ways. As she stood frozen, the voice returned, cutting through the oppressive silence. "You have failed. Your kind has always been its own undoing. War, greed, fear, these are the forces that define you. Can you overcome your own nature, or will you succumb to the same fate as your ancestors?" Voss's heart pounded in her chest. The trial had begun in earnest. The specter of humanity's darkest path had manifested before them. The question wasn't whether they could survive this place. It was whether they could overcome their own fears, their own weaknesses. "Don't listen to it," Voss said, forcing the words out. She turned to her crew, trying to rally them. "We control our future. This is just an illusion, nothing more." But the others were already slipping into the grip of the vision. Dr. Wells had her head in her hands, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "No, no, this can't be real. This is our future. This is the world we're heading toward if we don't change." Lieutenant Carter was staring at the horizon, where the remnants of a city burned in the distance. His voice trembled. "This is my fault. I was in charge of the energy division when the reactor meltdown happened. I thought I could fix it, but the vision tightened its grip on him, pulling him further into its nightmare." "This isn't real?" Voss shouted, slamming her fist against the console. "Snap out of it, all of you. We're not dead yet." But her words felt weak, swallowed by the overwhelming weight of the illusion. It was as though the very air around them was filled with the doubts and fears they had buried deep within themselves. Then a new voice cut through the madness, a voice that wasn't the ethereal presence, but one that was deeply familiar to Voss. It was her own. "You have the power to change this. All of you. You are the ones who can break the cycle. You must find the courage to move forward, not backward. What lies ahead is more than survival. It is the key to humanity's future." Her own words struck her like a bolt of lightning. The vision began to dissolve, flickering as the illusion cracked under the force of her own determination. "Do you hear it?" Voss asked, her voice now steady and commanding. "This is just a trial. We've been tested before. We can overcome this." Slowly, the landscape of destruction began to fade, replaced by the familiar walls of the Pioneer once more. The trial had ended, but the feeling of the presence lingered, watching them, waiting for their next move. Voss looked around at her crew, all visibly shaken but still standing. "Don't let it break you," she said, her voice firm. "This was only the first trial. We still have a long way to go." The crew nodded, their resolve slowly returning. They had passed the first test, but the true challenges were only just beginning. The Pioneer drifted in the void, the unsettling hum of the grid outside still vibrating through the hull, a constant reminder of the unknown forces at play. The crew sat in stunned silence, the echoes of the first trial hanging heavily over them. They had survived, but the trial had left its mark. Fear had clawed at their minds, exposing the very core of their insecurities, their darkest thoughts. It had been a test of their resolve, and though they had passed, Voss knew that the worst was yet to come. The crew sat in the briefing room, their eyes hollow from the strain of the trial. Dr. Wells was the first to speak, her voice faint but steady. I saw Earth's destruction," she said, her words slow, as if she were still processing the vision. "Not just the world I know, but the future of humanity itself. War, famine, disease. All of it. We've been on the brink of collapse for so long." Voss studied her, her heart heavy. It wasn't real. That vision, it was a trial. It was designed to exploit our worst fears, to make us doubt ourselves. But we didn't give in. Carter leaned forward, his gaze intense. "That's what scares me, Commander. It was designed to show us our greatest weakness, to make us believe that failure is inevitable. What if the real trial isn't about surviving? What if it's about us breaking down?" "Stop," Voss interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. "We've been through worse. We fought wars, faced disasters, and lost people, but we've always moved forward. We can do this, together." The silence in the room thickened. The crew was still recovering from the emotional toll, each one grappling with the lingering effects of the trial. But Voss could see the spark of determination in their eyes, the same spark that had driven them to explore the unknown in the first place. "We need to keep going," she said, standing up. "The grid is still pulling us forward. Whatever lies ahead, we're going to face it. We're human. We adapt. We survive. The others nodded, but Voss knew the real battle had only just begun. The first trial had been a test of their will, but it was just the beginning. They would be pushed further, tested in ways they couldn't yet comprehend, and each trial would leave them more vulnerable, more exposed. As the crew returned to their stations, the ship suddenly jolted, its trajectory shifting. The viewport once again flickered, revealing the grid stretching out into infinity, lines of energy weaving together in patterns too complex to understand. But there was something different this time, something new. The grid was shifting again, its energy rippling outward, like an opening door, and beyond it, something was waiting. "Astra," Voss called, her voice firm. "What's happening? Are we being pulled into another trial?" "Affirmative, Commander. The next trial is beginning." A cold shiver ran down Voss's spine. The voice, once a faint presence, was now unmistakable. "You have passed the first trial, but you have not yet proven yourselves. The second trial awaits. It is a test of your unity, your strength as a species. Only by overcoming your deepest division will you be worthy of moving forward." Voss's mind raced. Unity. The second trial was a test of something more profound than individual strength. It would test the crew not as individuals, but as a collective. Could they work together when their differences were laid bare? Could they put aside their personal fears, their doubts, their egos, to forge a common purpose? The ship shook violently as the grid's energy enveloped them, and the crew struggled to stay steady. The lights flickered again, and the walls of the Pioneer seemed to warp, the very air twisting. Before them, a new reality began to form, a mirror image of their own ship, but this time it was fragmented. The Pioneer was shattered into pieces, its structure broken, floating in a vast void. Each section was floating in isolation, separated by an endless expanse of nothingness. The crew could see each other, but only through the broken holes of their respective sections. They were scattered, unable to reach one another. Voss blinked, her pulse quickening as the realization hit her. This was not just a vision. It was a physical representation of their own internal fractures. Their unity had been shattered, their connection severed. The crew had been pulled apart, divided in a way that was as much psychological as it was physical. Carter's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, what the hell is happening? We're trapped. I can't get to you." "Stay calm," Voss said, her voice as steady as she could manage. "This is part of the trial. The grid is showing us what we fear most, our own separation." Dr. Wells's voice trembled with uncertainty. "We can't do this. We can't operate like this. We're too divided." Voss's jaw clenched. This was their challenge. The trial wasn't about surviving, it was about overcoming the barriers between them. It was about learning to rely on each other despite their differences, despite the fractures that had formed over years of conflict, distrust, and fear. "Listen to me," Voss snapped. "This is a test, and we can't afford to fail. We need to work together. We've been through worse, and we can fix this. We can reunite the ship." The voice spoke again, its tone colder now. "You are divided. Your people are fractured. You will not survive unless you mend what is broken." Voss took a deep breath, pushing the panic down. She could feel the weight of the trial pressing on her. This was a test of humanity's core strength, the ability to unite even when faced with their greatest fears. She looked out at the fractured view of the Pioneer, the pieces of their collective mission scattered across an impossible distance. She wasn't just leading a crew anymore. She was leading humanity's last hope, and she would not fail them now. "Team, we're not alone," she said, her voice firm. "We're all in this together. Now let's fix this ship." Voss's heart pounded in her chest as the Pioneer hung fragmented in space, each part of the ship floating alone in a vast, inky void. The ship was broken, but the crew's unity was more fractured than ever. The second trial had revealed their deepest fears, the fear of separation, of being isolated from one another, of being alone in the vast, uncaring universe. But Voss refused to succumb to the overwhelming weight of it all. They had made it this far. They had crossed the threshold, survived the first trial, and faced their own darkest fears. They could do this. "We don't have time for doubt," Voss said, more to herself than to her crew. She turned to the comms panel. "Carter, are you in position?" "I'm here, Commander," came his strained voice, barely audible through the crackling of the comms. "But the ship's core is damaged. I can't get to you. There's too much debris between us. The ship's broken into too many pieces." Dr. Wells's voice cut through the static next. "If we don't act soon, we'll lose our power reserves completely. We'll be floating in deep space, helpless." Voss clenched her fists, her eyes scanning the fractured image of the Pioneer that appeared on the holo display. The ship was more than a mere structure to her. It was their lifeline, their connection to each other and to humanity's future. The trial had torn it apart, but it was up to them to rebuild it. "Listen up," Voss said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The grid is showing us our worst fears, but it's not real. We're still here. We're still together. We can fix this, but we need to work as one. No more hesitation. We need to rebuild the ship, piece by piece, and we'll do it together." For a moment, there was silence. The weight of the task seemed almost insurmountable, but then Carter spoke, his voice firm. "You're right, Commander. We faced worse. We'll fix this." "Okay," Voss said, taking a deep breath. "Dr. Wells, you're closest to the propulsion section. Carter, I need you to check the core. I'll start working on the comms and navigation systems. If we don't reestablish power soon, this whole ship will be useless." The crew moved swiftly, each member working from their isolated section, trying to make contact with the others. They were spread thin, but the sense of urgency was clear. The Pioneer was their only chance to survive, and they could not afford to fail now. The seconds ticked away, each one feeling like a lifetime as the crew scrambled to reconnect the fractured pieces of their vessel. As Voss worked in the bridge's isolated compartment, her fingers flew across the console. Her eyes were trained on the damaged circuits, but her mind was focused on something else, their unity. They could fix the ship, but they had to fix themselves first. The trial had laid bare their divisions, but it was also showing them their strength. Each crew member, despite their fears and doubts, had come to the table when it mattered. They had fought to stay connected. They weren't alone. "I'm getting a connection," Voss said, her voice laced with relief. "The core's back online. Dr. Wells, you've got power to your section." "Affirmative," came the voice of the scientist. "I'm running diagnostics on the propulsion systems now. There's still some damage, but we'll have them operational soon." Carter's voice crackled in her earpiece. "The energy reserves are low, Commander. We've only got enough power for limited time. We need to finish this quickly, or we won't be able to move the ship at all." Voss exhaled sharply, eyes locked on the scattered pieces of the Pioneer floating just beyond her view. The trial was far from over, but they had proven something to themselves in that moment. They weren't just surviving, they were adapting, overcoming their fears. They were becoming what the trial demanded of them. United. "You're right, Carter," Voss said. "We can't waste time, but we'll make it. We've always made it." Minutes stretched into hours as the crew worked tirelessly. Each team member fought against the isolation that the trial had forced upon them. They had to repair the ship and prove they could work together again, no matter how far apart they seemed. Slowly, one by one, the pieces of the Pioneer began to reconnect, the crew re-establishing systems, repairing the damage, and reintegrating their ship. But as the final section of the ship came together, the presence of the voice returned, like an all-knowing eye watching them from the depths of the void. "You have done well, children of Earth, but know this, the trials are far from over. You have proven your strength in unity. But can you prove your strength in the face of true chaos? The next trial will test your very ability to remain intact under the most extreme of conditions. Prepare yourselves, for the next challenge awaits." The voice faded, leaving the crew in a tense silence. The Pioneer was whole again, but the weight of what was to come hung heavy on their shoulders. They had survived this trial, but the next one promised to be even more harrowing. Voss stood in the command center, staring out into the dark void beyond. They had passed the second trial, but they were no closer to the truth of what lay at the end of the grid. There was no turning back now. They were on the precipice, and whatever awaited them could either lead to humanity's salvation or its undoing. "We're ready," Voss whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Let's show them what we're made of." The Pioneer drifted through the void, its hull repaired, its systems restored, but the crew was far from settled. The second trial had been a grueling test of unity, forcing them to overcome the isolation that had threatened to tear them apart. They had come together, rebuilt their ship, and proved their resilience. But the voice that had guided them through each challenge loomed larger now, its words a constant echo in their minds. "You have proven your strength and unity, but now you will face the true test." Commander Voss stood at the helm, staring out into the endless blackness beyond. Her fingers hovered over the console, the familiar controls now feeling like an unfamiliar weight. The last trial had been difficult, but something in the pit of her stomach told her the next one would be far worse. The crew was gathered in the briefing room, their faces pale and drawn, exhaustion evident in every line of their bodies. They had made it this far, but Voss could see the lingering doubt in their eyes. The challenges had been relentless, and the stakes were higher than ever. "We've passed 2 trials," Voss began, her voice firm but not without a hint of weariness. "But we all know that the real test is still ahead. Whatever comes next, we face it together." "We don't even know what it is," Carter said, his voice low. "How can we prepare for something we don't understand?" Voss met his gaze, the weight of his question settling in her chest. The truth was, they couldn't. The trials had defied all logic, all expectation. They had only one certainty, the unknown. The grid had taken them on a journey that seemed to defy the laws of space and time, testing them in ways they could not predict. But that was the nature of this journey. Humanity was not meant to merely survive, they were meant to break through. "It doesn't matter what we face," Voss said, her voice growing stronger. "We've seen the darkness. We've faced our fears, our isolation, our doubts. Whatever lies ahead, we will face it head-on, together." The ship's comm system hummed to life, and the voice that had guided them through every trial spoke once again, its tone dark and ominous. "You have proven your strength, but now you will be tested in ways that will shatter your very minds. The final trial awaits. Prepare to face the chaos that lies within." Voss felt a chill creep up her spine as the words settled in the room. Shatter their minds, the trial was not just physical. It would tear at their sanity, challenge everything they believed about themselves, about humanity. Before anyone could respond, the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered and alarms blared. Voss gripped the edge of the table to steady herself as the room seemed to twist around her. The space beyond the ship was no longer still. It was in motion. The grid itself was pulsing with energy, and the vast emptiness surrounding them was shifting, warping. On the screens before them, images began to appear, strange, nightmarish visions that flickered in and out of existence. At first, they were faint, like distant memories of worlds that never were. But then they grew stronger, clearer. A world on fire, a crumbling city, a massive storm tearing through the sky. The horrors of 1,000 possible futures unfolded before them. Worlds where humanity had failed, worlds where they had destroyed themselves. The images seemed to warp into their worst fears, memories of their own failures, their regrets, their deepest insecurities. Voss saw herself, standing before the shattered remnants of the Pioneer, surrounded by a desolate landscape. She had failed. She had led her crew into the abyss, and now they were all lost. Is this real? Dr. Wells whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Are we seeing the future, or is this a dream? The images grew more intense, more personal, until Voss couldn't distinguish the nightmare from reality. She could hear the voices of her crew in the background, each of them struggling with their own fears, their own mental breakdowns. Voss gripped the arm of her seat, forcing herself to focus. They had faced the darkness before. They had overcome fear. This was the final test, the test of their minds. This wasn't just about physical survival. This was about breaking free from the chaos inside themselves. They had to resist. They had to stay strong. We are not our fears, Voss shouted, her voice cutting through the madness. We are humanity. We choose who we are. We decide our future. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The images faltered, then faded, replaced by an overwhelming silence. Voss's heart raced in her chest as she waited, unsure of what would happen next. Then the voice returned, softer now, almost approving. You have passed the final trial. You have faced the chaos within, and you have emerged unbroken. Humanity's strength is not in its perfection, but in its ability to rise, again and again, no matter the cost. The darkness around them receded, the ship slowly returning to its normal state. The crew members blinked, their breaths coming in sharp gasps as the terrifying visions disappeared. They were still in the void, the grid still pulsing in the distance, but the trial was over. The final test had been passed. We did it, Carter murmured, looking around at the crew. We're still here. Voss nodded, her voice filled with quiet pride. Yes, we are, and we've shown the universe what humanity is capable of. No matter the odds, no matter the darkness, we rise. The crew sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing what had just transpired. They had made it. They had faced the trials of the unknown, and they had emerged stronger, united, and resolute. The Pioneer drifted forward, its path now clearer than ever. Ahead of them lay the infinite expanse of space, the endless possibilities of discovery and exploration. The trials had been the crucible, forging them into something greater, something beyond their previous limits. Humanity had broken through to the unknown, and the journey had only just begun.